I stood in my own kitchen, mortgage papers in my trembling hands, as my sister Sarah screamed at me, calling me a worthless freeloader who needed to get out of her house. The irony burned through me like acid. 3 years ago, I bought this 4-bedroom colonial in suburban Denver, specifically, so Sarah and her 2 kids could have a stable home after her messy divorce. Now she was demanding I leave, because her new boyfriend Rick thought I was taking advantage of them. The betrayal cut deeper than any knife ever could. Looking back now, I can see how naive I was 3 years ago. I was 25 then, working as a software engineer at a tech startup called CodeFlow, pulling down $75,000 a year and living in a cramped studio apartment on 17th Street downtown. My world was simple work, gym, occasional drinks with colleagues, and weekend video games. Then Sarah's universe collapsed like a house of cards in a hurricane. Her husband, Brad, had been cheating with his secretary, Jennifer, for 8 months before Sarah discovered them together in their marital bed. The divorce was brutal and expensive, with Brad hiding assets and fighting every penny of support. Sarah ended up with primary custody of 8-year-old Emma and 5-year-old Tyler, but Brad's financial games left her facing foreclosure on their rented duplex in Thornton. Sarah worked part-time as a dental hygienist at Mountain View Family Dentistry, barely pulling in $1,500 a month. After rent, utilities, groceries, and childcare, she had maybe $50 left for emergencies. I watched my sister, who had always been the strong one, the one who protected me from playground bullies and helped me with homework, crumble under the weight of single motherhood and financial terror. That's when I made the decision that would change everything. I had been saving for years, living like a monk in that tiny apartment, putting away every extra dollar. I had accumulated $63,000 in savings, originally intended for some distant dream of entrepreneurship. Instead, I decided to buy a house where Sarah and the kids could rebuild their lives. I spent 3 weeks driving through neighborhoods, evaluating schools, checking crime statistics, and measuring commute times. The house I found in Lakewood was perfect, a 1994 colonial with 4 bedrooms, 3 full bathrooms, a finished basement with a recreation room, and a large backyard with mature oak trees. The elementary school was rated 9 out of 10, the middle school had excellent programs, and Sarah could reach her job in 25 minutes. The purchase price was $285,000. I put down $60,000 and took a 30-year mortgage at 4.2% interest. My monthly payment was $1,347, plus property taxes of $260, monthly homeowners insurance at $115, and utilities averaging $250. I was looking at nearly $2,000 in monthly expenses. I presented the plan to Sarah with excitement, expecting gratitude and relief. The arrangement seemed reasonable. She would contribute $500 monthly toward utilities and groceries, which was less than half what she had been paying in rent. I would handle the mortgage, property taxes, insurance, and major household expenses. Sarah would help with cooking and cleaning, creating a family environment that would benefit everyone. The first year was everything I had hoped for. Emma thrived in her new school, making friends quickly and joining the art club. Tyler, who had been having behavioral problems during the divorce, settled into a routine and started sleeping through the night again. Sarah seemed like her old self, laughing during family dinners, and even dating occasionally. Sarah cooked incredible meals, turning our dining room into a place where we shared stories about our days. She helped me organize my home office, setting up filing systems, and even decorating with plants and family photos. We established routines: Saturday morning pancakes, Sunday afternoon football, shared household chores that felt natural rather than burdensome. But gradually, subtly, things began shifting. Sarah started treating the house as entirely her domain. She would invite her book club friends over, without mentioning it to me, rearranging furniture to accommodate their meetings. She painted Emma's room bright purple and Tyler's room with superhero murals, both projects happening, while I was at work, presented as happy surprises when I returned home. When I gently mentioned that major changes should be discussed, since it was legally my house, Sarah would laugh it off with comments like, "Come on, Jonas, families don't keep score," or, "It's not like you're going to kick us out over paint colors." Her tone was light, but there was an edge I had never heard before. The transformation accelerated when Sarah met Rick at a car dealership, where she was getting her transmission repaired. She came home glowing, talking about this charming man who had given her a great deal and asked for her number. Within 2 weeks, they were inseparable. That's when Sarah began rewriting our history completely. I overheard her on the phone with her friend Janet, describing how she was helping her struggling younger brother get back on his feet by letting him live in her house. She told Janet that I had been having financial difficulties, and she was providing me with stable housing while I worked through my problems. The lie was so audacious, so completely opposite to reality, that I initially thought I had misheard. But over the following weeks, I heard variations of the same story. Sarah told her co-workers that she was supporting me financially. She told the kids' teachers that their uncle was going through a rough patch and living with them temporarily. She even told the mail carrier that she was the homeowner and I was her brother staying with her. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. Sarah had taken my generosity, my sacrifice, my decision to provide stability for her family, and twisted it into a narrative where she was the generous sister helping her deadbeat brother. The woman I had bought a house for was now claiming to own that house and portraying me as a charity case. Rick Matthews entered our lives like a tornado dressed in cheap cologne and gold chains. He was 42 years old, 6 feet tall, with slicked back brown hair, a goatee that needed trimming, and the kind of confident swagger that screamed used car salesman. He wore shiny dress shirts with too many buttons undone, revealing a thick gold chain that caught the light whenever he moved. From the very first time Rick stepped into my house, he acted like he belonged there. He would walk in without knocking, head straight to the refrigerator, and help himself to whatever food caught his attention. When I introduced myself as Jonas the homeowner, Rick gave me a condescending handshake and said, "Nice to meet you, man. Sarah told me all about your situation." My situation, as if I was some troubled relative who needed managing. Rick's presence became constant and invasive. He started spending every night at the house, leaving his construction boots by the front door, his cigarettes on the kitchen counter, and his leather jacket draped over my dining room chairs. His truck, a lifted red Ford with oversized tires and chrome accessories, dominated my driveway, forcing me to park on the street. The psychological warfare began immediately. Rick would use my streaming accounts without permission, changing my Netflix profiles and messing up my recommendations. He would take 45-minute showers, using up all the hot water before my morning routine. When I mentioned these issues to Sarah, she would defend him with comments like, "He's just getting comfortable," or, "You need to be more welcoming to my happiness." Rick's treatment of me became increasingly disrespectful. He would interrupt conversations, talk over me during dinner, and make jokes at my expense that left everyone laughing except me. He started giving me unsolicited advice about my career, suggesting I was wasting my potential in tech and should consider real work, like construction or sales. The situation escalated when Rick began inviting his friends over for poker nights every Thursday. These weren't quiet card games. They were loud, smoke-filled gatherings that lasted until 2 in the morning. Rick's friends, guys named Dale and Bobby with similar gold chains and attitudes, would park their trucks on my lawn-leaf beer cans throughout the house and treat me like hired help when they needed fresh drinks or snacks. When I objected to the poker nights, Rick suggested I was being antisocial and holding Sarah back from having a normal relationship. He positioned every complaint I made as evidence that I was jealous of their happiness and resentful of sharing the space with other people. Rick's manipulation of the children was particularly insidious. He would buy Emma expensive art supplies and Tyler video games always positioning himself as the generous provider while making subtle comments about how Uncle Jonas was too focused on work to think about what kids really wanted. He taught Tyler to throw football in the backyard, something I had been planning to do but hadn't had time for, then made comments about how boys needed strong male role models. The breaking point came when I discovered Rick had given Emma and Tyler a key to his apartment, telling them they could visit anytime they wanted to get away from the stress at home. When I asked what stress he was referring to, Rick claimed the kids had told him they felt uncomfortable with the tension I was creating by not accepting their new family dynamic. 3 months after Rick's arrival, I overheard a phone conversation that changed everything. I was working late in my home office when Rick stepped onto the back patio to take a call, apparently thinking I had already gone to bed. His voice carried clearly through my office window. "Yeah, man, I figured it out," Rick was saying to someone. "The little geek actually owns the whole place. Sarah didn't know what she was talking about when she said it was her house. But here's the thing, this works even better for us." My blood ran cold as I listened to Rick's voice take on a calculating tone I had never heard before. "Think about it, Tommy. This guy is so desperate to keep his sister happy he'll do anything to avoid family drama. I bet I can manipulate this situation so that he signs the place over to Sarah for the kids' sake. Then we've got ourselves a free house in a nice neighborhood probably worth $300,000 easy." Rick continued outlining his scheme with professional precision. He planned to make my life so miserable that I would eventually crack under the pressure. He would create situations that made me look unstable or unreasonable, turn Sarah and the kids against me, and eventually present me with an ultimatum sign over the house, or watch my family relationships implode. "The sister's already completely on my side," Rick bragged. "She believes every word I say about her brother being jealous and possessive. I've got her convinced that he's the problem in their family dynamic. Give me another few months and I'll have her ready to choose between him and me. And when she chooses me, little Jonas will hand over that deed just to keep the peace." I realized with horror that I wasn't just dealing with a disrespectful boyfriend anymore. Rick was a predator who had identified an opportunity and was systematically working to steal my home through psychological manipulation and emotional warfare. The sister I had sacrificed everything for was being turned into a weapon against me by a man who saw us both as marks in an elaborate con game. Rick's campaign against me became systematic and relentless, like a military operation designed to break down my resistance through constant psychological pressure. He understood that direct confrontation would expose his true nature to Sarah, so instead he employed subtle warfare that left me looking paranoid and unreasonable whenever I tried to explain what was happening. The food games started small, but became increasingly infuriating. Rick would eat my carefully labeled leftovers from work lunches, always leaving just enough to make it look accidental. When I confronted him, he would apologize profusely, claiming he thought the food was for everyone, and offering to replace it. But replacement never happened, and the pattern continued weekly. Rick began using my personal belongings without permission, treating my home office like his personal workspace. I would come home to find him using my laptop, claiming Sarah had said it was okay, because he needed to check something quickly for work. He would adjust my desk chair, move my papers, and leave greasy fingerprints on my monitor. When I installed a password on my computer, Rick complained to Sarah that I was being territorial and weird about sharing resources. The sleep deprivation warfare was particularly effective. Rick and Sarah would have passionate arguments late at night, always somehow positioned right outside my bedroom door. These fights would involve raised voices, door slamming, and dramatic reconciliations that lasted until 3 in the morning. When I mentioned being kept awake, Rick would claim he and Sarah were just working through relationship issues and suggest I was being unsympathetic to their emotional needs. Rick's accidents escalated in value and personal significance. He broke my coffee maker by accidentally knocking it off the counter while reaching for something in the cabinet above. The replacement he promised never materialized, forcing me to buy a new one. Next was a framed photograph of our deceased father, knocked over during one of Rick's enthusiastic gestures while telling a story. The glass shattered, scratching the irreplaceable photo underneath. The destruction of my expensive noise-canceling headphones was the cruelest act. Rick claimed he had been trying to move them to a safer place when they fell and broke. These headphones were essential for my work in software development, allowing me to concentrate in our increasingly chaotic household. Without them, my productivity plummeted, creating stress at my job that Rick seemed to enjoy observing. Rick's manipulation of Emma and Tyler was heartbreaking to witness. He would pull the children aside for private conversations, during which he would plant seeds of doubt about their living situation. He told Emma that Uncle Jonas was planning changes that might affect their family, making her anxious and clingy with Sarah. He convinced Tyler that I was angry with him for being too loud, causing my nephew to avoid me entirely. The children's changed behavior toward me was devastating. Emma, who used to seek me out for help with math homework and science projects, began treating me with suspicious distance. Tyler stopped asking me to play video games or throw football, preferring to wait for Rick's attention instead. When I tried to engage with them, they would exchange glances and find excuses to leave the room. Rick's psychological manipulation reached new depths when he began staging scenarios designed to make me appear unstable. He would deliberately provoke arguments when the children were within earshot, raising his voice and making inflammatory statements, while keeping his body language calm and controlled. To any observer, I would appear to be the aggressor, while Rick seemed to be the reasonable party trying to diffuse tension. The breaking point arrived on a Thursday evening when I came home from work to find a 26-foot travel trailer parked in my driveway. Rick was directing two of his friends, Dale and Bobby, as they unloaded furniture and boxes from a moving truck, storing everything in my two-car garage without permission. When I demanded an explanation, Rick adopted his usual innocent demeanor, explaining that he was between apartments and needed temporary storage space. He assured me it would only be for a couple of weeks while he found a permanent solution. Sarah stood beside him, nodding supportively, and asking me to be understanding about Rick's housing transition. I pointed out that using my garage as a storage unit without permission was completely unacceptable, especially when the trailer was blocking access to my own driveway. Rick's demeanor shifted instantly from apologetic to aggressive. He stepped closer to me, using his height advantage intimidatingly, and suggested I was being selfish and unreasonable about helping my sister's boyfriend during a temporary difficulty. "You know what your problem is, Jonas," Rick said, his voice taking on a threatening edge. "You act like you own this place, but you're just another guy living here like the rest of us. Sarah's been carrying you for months, and now you want to play king of the castle when someone else needs a little help." The argument escalated quickly, with Rick becoming increasingly aggressive while maintaining plausible deniability about his threats. He would move closer, speak louder, and gesture more dramatically, while always stopping just short of actual physical contact. To Sarah and the children watching from the doorway, it appeared that I was overreacting to a reasonable request for temporary assistance. The devastating blow came the next morning when I woke to find police officers at my front door. Sarah had filed a report claiming I had threatened her and the children the previous evening, describing me as increasingly unstable and violent toward my own family. Officer Martinez and Officer Thompson listened as Sarah provided detailed accounts of my supposed threats. She claimed I had yelled at the children for supporting Rick, threatened to make everyone's life miserable if they didn't start showing me more respect, and even alleged that I had punched the wall during our argument, frightening Emma and Tyler. The officers examined my knuckles for injuries consistent with wall punching, and found none, but they treated Sarah's emotional testimony as credible evidence of domestic disturbance. They saw utility bills with Sarah's name, Rick's confident presence as the protective boyfriend, and my obvious distress as signs that I was indeed the problematic party in this family dynamic. Officer Martinez warned me about the legal consequences of domestic threats, explaining that any further complaints could result in immediate arrest and removal from the home. He suggested I consider anger management counseling and family mediation to resolve whatever underlying issues were creating tension in the household. As the officers left, Rick placed a protective arm around Sarah's shoulders and made eye contact with me over her head. His expression was pure satisfaction, the look of a predator who had successfully isolated his prey and eliminated potential interference. I realized that Sarah had crossed a line I never thought possible, willing to destroy my reputation and potentially my freedom to protect her relationship with a man who was systematically destroying our family. The false police report shattered any remaining illusions I had about Sarah's loyalty or judgment. My own sister had weaponized law enforcement against me, creating an official record that could be used to destroy my life and career. I knew I needed documentation and legal protection before Rick's next escalation, so I took a personal day from work and drove to the Jefferson County Recorder's office. Walking through the government building's marble corridors, I felt like a stranger in my own life. How had helping my sister lead to me needing legal proof of my own property ownership? The irony was bitter. I was gathering evidence to prove I owned the house I had bought specifically to help the person now trying to take it from me. The county recorder's office was a maze of filing cabinets, computer terminals, and tired-looking clerks processing endless streams of property documents. I approached the main desk and requested certified copies of all records related to my Lakewood property, the original deed mortgage documentation title, insurance tax records, and any recent filing activity. Margaret Wu, a slight woman in her 50s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, processed my request with efficient professionalism. As she pulled up my property records on her computer, her expression shifted from routine helpfulness to concerned confusion. "Mr. Jonas," Margaret said, lowering her voice and glancing around the office. "I need to show you something that's been filed regarding your property. There's been quite a bit of unusual activity on this address over the past 2 months." My stomach dropped as Margaret spread a stack of documents across her desk. Sarah had been busy filing multiple claims and affidavits that painted a completely fabricated picture of our housing arrangement. The paperwork was extensive and professionally prepared, suggesting she had received legal guidance on exactly what documentation would be needed to support her fraudulent claims. The first document was an affidavit claiming Sarah had contributed $15,000 toward the down payment on the house, complete with forged bank statements showing transfers that had never occurred. The second was a series of fabricated receipts, allegedly showing Sarah had paid for major home improvements, a new furnace roof repairs, and kitchen renovations that had never happened. Most shocking was a collection of false mortgage payment records claiming Sarah had been making the monthly house payments for over 2 years. The forged bank statements showed automatic withdrawals from Sarah's account to Pinnacle Mortgage Company payments that I knew had always come from my account. The forgeries were sophisticated with realistic-looking bank letterhead and transaction numbers. Margaret pointed to a particularly disturbing document, an adverse possession claim. Sarah was arguing that because she had been the primary resident and financial supporter of the property for over 2 years, she had legal grounds to claim ownership through continuous occupation and maintenance. The filing claimed I was merely a tenant who had fallen behind on rent payments to her. "This is where it gets really concerning," Margaret whispered, producing another stack of papers. "Someone matching your sister's description came in 3 times with a man who fits your description of Rick. They asked detailed questions about property transfer procedures, what documentation would be needed to prove ownership, and how to challenge existing title records. The documentation Sarah and Rick had prepared was disturbingly thorough. They had created a fictional timeline where Sarah had been supporting me financially since my supposed job loss 18 months ago. They claimed she had taken over mortgage payments when I defaulted on my responsibilities, and that I had been living in the house as her dependent rather than as the owner. Margaret showed me copies of practice signatures on scratch paper, where Sarah had obviously been rehearsing my handwriting. The attempts were crude, but showed systematic improvement, suggesting she had been planning to forge my signature on official documents. The most chilling discovery was a completed but unnotarized quitclaim deed, transferring ownership from me to Sarah with a forged version of my signature already in place. "If you hadn't come in when you did," Margaret explained, "these fraudulent documents might have created enough confusion to tie up your property in legal disputes for years. Even though the documents are obviously fabricated, responding to adverse possession claims and fighting forged paperwork can cost thousands in legal fees and take months of court time to resolve." Margaret pulled me aside and explained that Sarah and Rick had consulted with an attorney named Danny Torres, whose office was located in a strip mall near Colfax Avenue. Torres apparently specialized in helping people navigate property disputes and had coached them on creating documentation that would support their ownership claims. The attorney had provided templates for affidavits and guided them on what types of evidence would be most convincing to county officials. The scope of the conspiracy was breathtaking. This wasn't impulsive deception born from emotional manipulation. It was a calculated, systematic attempt to steal my property through fraud, forgery, and perjury. Sarah and Rick had spent weeks preparing false documentation, consulting with attorneys, and filing official claims designed to establish a legal foundation for taking my house. Margaret provided me with certified copies of all the fraudulent documents, along with official statements detailing when they were filed and who had submitted them. She also gave me contact information for the county's fraud investigation unit and suggested I immediately consult with a real estate attorney to protect my interests. As I drove home with a folder full of evidence documenting my sister's betrayal, I felt something shift inside me. The naive part of me that wanted to believe Sarah was simply confused or misguided died completely. The woman who had filed these documents wasn't my loving sister making poor choices. She was a stranger willing to commit serious crimes to steal my life's work. I realized that Rick hadn't just manipulated Sarah into disrespecting me. He had transformed her into an active participant in a criminal conspiracy. The sister I had sacrificed everything for the woman I had trusted with my home and my future was now my enemy in the most literal sense. She wasn't just choosing her boyfriend over her brother. She was choosing crime over family theft, over gratitude and destruction, over love. The evidence in my folder represented more than fraud. It was proof that the family I thought I was protecting had never really existed at all. Armed with a folder full of evidence documenting Sarah's attempted theft, I drove home through Denver traffic with my mind racing through possible confrontation strategies. The naive part of me hoped that presenting Sarah with proof of her crimes might shock her back to reality, but the realist in me prepared for escalation and denial. I found them exactly where I expected, Rick lounging in my recliner with his boots up on my coffee table. Sarah curled beside him on the couch, and the children sprawled on the floor watching a Disney movie. The scene looked peaceful and domestic, a perfect family enjoying a quiet evening together. Only I knew the criminal conspiracy lurking beneath this facade of normalcy. Emma looked up when I entered, offering a tentative smile that reminded me of the loving niece she used to be before Rick's poison infected our household. Tyler barely glanced away from the television, his attention focused on animated characters rather than the uncle he had once adored. The distance Rick had created between me and the children was perhaps his cruelest achievement. I placed the certified copies of all fraudulent documents on the coffee table, arranging them in chronological order so Sarah could see the full scope of her crimes laid out systematically. The papers spread across the surface like evidence in a courtroom, each document representing another step in her systematic betrayal of everything I had done for our family. I spent the morning at the county recorder's office. I said, keeping my voice calm and factual, I discovered some very interesting documents that have been filed regarding this property. Documents with your signature, Sarah, making claims that we both know are completely false. Sarah's face drained of color as she recognized the paperwork, but Rick remained composed, his expression shifting into defensive mode. He leaned forward, examining the documents with the casual interest of someone reviewing a restaurant menu rather than evidence of serious crimes. Rick stood up, his height and aggressive body language immediately making the room feel smaller and more threatening. What are you trying to prove here, Jonas? That you're some kind of detective now? Sarah's been supporting this household for months, while you act like you own the place. Maybe it's time someone made that official. I methodically explained each fraudulent document, the false affidavits claiming Sarah had contributed to the down payment, the forged bank statements showing mortgage payments she had never made, the fabricated receipts for home improvements that had never occurred, and the adverse possession claim based entirely on lies. Every signature here is yours, Sarah, I said, watching my sister's face carefully. Every statement is sworn under penalty of perjury. Every claim is completely false, and you know it. This isn't a misunderstanding or a difference of opinion. This is felony fraud, forgery, and filing false documents with government officials. Rick exploded with theatrical outrage, shouting that I was harassing them with legal nonsense designed to intimidate Sarah into submission. He claimed I was trying to use technicalities and paperwork to avoid taking responsibility for my financial dependence on my sister's generosity. You think you can scare us with this garbage? Rick yelled, waving the documents dismissively. Sarah's been taking care of you in this house while you played computer games all day. Just because your name is on some old papers doesn't mean you've been acting like a real owner. Sarah's the one who made this place a home. I gave them a simple choice. Rick leaves immediately and permanently. Sarah acknowledges her attempted fraud and agrees to return to our original arrangement, or I start eviction proceedings while simultaneously pressing criminal charges for forgery, fraud, and filing false police reports. Rick's response was exactly what I expected: aggressive threats wrapped in victim language. He screamed that I couldn't throw him out because he didn't officially live there, that I had no proof he was involved in any fraud, and that he would make my life a living nightmare if I tried to interfere with his relationship with Sarah. You think you're so smart with your little investigation? Rick snarled, stepping closer to me in obvious intimidation. But you can't prove I did anything wrong. Those documents are between Sarah and the county. I'm just her boyfriend trying to protect her from her psycho brother who's threatening to destroy his own family. Sarah, cornered and desperate, played the card I should have anticipated, but somehow never saw coming. Through tears that seemed genuine, she revealed that she was 8 weeks pregnant with Rick's baby, and they had been planning to announce the pregnancy to the family soon. The emotional manipulation was immediate and overwhelming. Sarah talked about needing stability for her growing family, about Emma and Tyler having endured enough upheaval already, and about how their deceased father would have wanted me to take care of my sister during her time of need. Daddy always said family comes first. Jonas. Sarah sobbed, using our father's memory as a weapon against me. He would want you to do the right thing and help me provide security for these children. Emma and Tyler have been through so much with the divorce, and now they're finally happy again. Are you really going to destroy their stability over paperwork and legal technicalities? Rick transformed instantly into the protective father-to-be, wrapping his arms around Sarah's shoulders and speaking in measured, reasonable tones about the needs of pregnant women and innocent children. He suggested that I was jealous of their happiness and trying to break up their family out of spite and resentment. Look at what you're doing to her, man, Rick said, his voice dripping with manufactured concern. She's pregnant and scared, and you're threatening her with police and lawyers over a house dispute. What kind of brother puts legal documents ahead of his sister's well-being and his unborn nephew or niece? Emma and Tyler, hearing about the new baby for the first time, became excited and ran to hug their mother. Their joy was genuine and innocent, and seeing their happiness made me look like the villain threatening their family's bright future. The children looked at me with confusion and disappointment, wondering why Uncle Jonas was making their pregnant mother cry. The weight of expectation, guilt, and emotional manipulation was crushing. Sarah's tears, the children's excitement about a new baby, Rick's reasonable-sounding concerns about family welfare, and the memory of my father's emphasis on family loyalty all combined into a perfect storm of psychological pressure. For a moment, standing in my own living room, surrounded by the family I had sacrificed everything to help, I felt the old Jonas emerging. The part of me that always accommodated, always sacrificed, always chose peace over principles. Sarah was family. She was pregnant and vulnerable, and the children needed stability. Maybe I should just sign the papers and find my own apartment, preserving family harmony and protecting an unborn child. But then I looked at Rick's eyes over Sarah's head, and I saw something that chilled me to the bone. There was no love there, no genuine concern for Sarah or the baby. There was only cold satisfaction, the look of a predator who had successfully manipulated his prey into a corner. Rick wasn't protecting a vulnerable pregnant woman. He was using that pregnancy as the final weapon in his systematic theft of my life. I realized that giving in now wouldn't protect Sarah or the children. It would enable Rick's continued abuse and guarantee that this pattern would repeat itself with his next victim. Sometimes protecting family means setting boundaries, even when those boundaries feel cruel. Sometimes love requires saying no, especially when someone you care about is being manipulated into destroying herself. I looked at my pregnant sister surrounded by her children, and the man who was manipulating her into destroying her own brother, and I felt something fundamental shift inside me. The old Jonas, the one who always accommodated and sacrificed for family harmony, died in that moment. What replaced him was someone who understood that real love sometimes requires painful truth rather than comfortable lies. Instead of responding to their emotional manipulation, I reached into my pocket and placed my phone on the coffee table, showing them clearly that it had been recording our entire conversation. The red recording indicator glowed like a warning light, capturing Rick's threats, Sarah's admission of fraud, and their coordinated attempt to pressure me into surrendering my property through guilt and manufactured crisis. "Everything you've said tonight is now documented," I said calmly. Rick's threats about making my life a nightmare, Sarah's admission that she filed false documents, and your joint attempt to manipulate me into signing over my house using an unborn child as emotional leverage. But I wasn't finished. Over the past week since discovering Sarah's fraud, I had been conducting my own investigation. The private investigator I hired, Carol Henderson, was a former police detective who specialized in background checks and fraud investigations. What she had discovered about Rick was devastating enough to destroy him completely. I opened my laptop and turned it toward them, displaying a comprehensive report that Carol had compiled about Rick's real identity and criminal history. The man sitting in my living room wasn't who he claimed to be, and his relationship with Sarah was just the latest iteration of a practiced criminal pattern. Richard Kowalski. I said, watching Rick's confident expression crumble as his real name filled the screen. "That's your actual name, isn't it, Rick? Not Rick Matthews like you told Sarah. Richard Kowalski, age 43, with an active warrant in Arizona for violating parole on fraud charges." Carol's investigation had uncovered Rick's entire criminal enterprise. 3 years ago in Phoenix, he had convinced his girlfriend Maria Santos to mortgage her house for a supposed business investment, then disappeared with $87,000, leaving her facing foreclosure. Before that, he had operated a scheme in Albuquerque, where he moved in with vulnerable single mothers, convinced them to add him to property titles, then used intimidation and legal manipulation to force them out of their own homes. The pattern was identical across 4 different women in 3 different states. Rick would identify single mothers with housing stability or family financial support move in quickly systematically isolate them from protective family members, create fake documentation to establish property rights, and then either steal money through fraudulent loans or manipulate his victims into signing over assets. Every woman thought she was special. I continued watching Sarah's face as the truth sank in. Every woman thought Rick loved her and wanted to build a future together. Every woman was pregnant or had young children that Rick used as emotional weapons to prevent them from thinking clearly about his demands. I played audio recordings that Carol had obtained from Rick's previous victims, women who sounded exactly like Sarah telling identical stories. Maria Santos describing how Rick had convinced her to mortgage her house for their future together. Jennifer Walsh explaining how Rick had turned her against her protective brother, who tried to warn her about the relationship. Lisa Chen detailing how Rick had used her pregnancy to pressure her into signing financial documents. The pregnancy revelation that Sarah thought sealed their relationship was just another manipulation tool Rick had used before. Carol's research showed that Rick had fathered children with 3 previous victims, abandoning them all when his schemes were exposed or when better opportunities presented themselves. Sarah's face went from defiant to confused to horrified as she realized she wasn't Rick's soulmate or life partner. She was just another mark in a practiced con game. The special connection she thought they shared, the unique bond that made her willing to betray her own brother, was actually a formula Rick had perfected through years of victimizing vulnerable women. I showed Sarah text messages Carol had recovered from Rick's previous phone numbers, where he bragged to friends about his house hunting strategy. In one particularly damning message, Rick described Sarah as the perfect mark with a sucker brother who'll probably sign over everything to keep family peace. He had been laughing about our situation with his criminal associates while pretending to love my sister. The most devastating evidence was a folder Carol found in Rick's apartment during a legal search she had arranged through her police contacts. The folder contained detailed notes about our family's financial situation, photographs of our house from multiple angles, copies of public records about my employment and credit history, and a timeline planning Sarah's emotional manipulation. Rick had been calculating our destruction from the moment he met Sarah. The fights, the disrespect, the systematic boundary violations, the manipulation of the children, even the decision to get Sarah pregnant, were all strategic moves in a planned theft of my property and destruction of our family. Rick, seeing his carefully constructed identity and scheme exposed, became dangerous in a way I had never witnessed before. He lunged toward my laptop, screaming that I was lying and making up stories to destroy his relationship with Sarah. When I pulled the computer away from his reaching hands, Rick grabbed a heavy glass lamp from the side table and raised it above his head, threatening to bash in my skull if I didn't delete everything immediately. "You think you're so smart, college boy?" Rick snarled, his mask completely dropped, now revealing the violent criminal underneath the charming facade. "You have no idea who you're messing with. I've destroyed tougher guys than you, and I'll bury you so deep your own sister won't remember your name." This final act of violence, captured clearly on my phone's recording, gave me everything I needed to destroy Rick completely. But more importantly, it showed Sarah exactly who she had chosen over her own family. The man threatening to murder her brother while her children watched was the same man she had been willing to commit crimes for the father of her unborn child, the person she had trusted with her future and her family's security. Emma and Tyler cowered behind the couch as Rick raged with the lamp raised above his head, finally seeing the monster their uncle had been trying to protect them from all along. The next morning, while Rick was still sleeping off his rage from the previous night, I implemented a plan that would end his criminal career permanently. I had spent the early hours organizing evidence, contacting authorities, and preparing legal actions that would protect not just my property, but Rick's future victims as well. My first stop was the Denver Police Department, where Detective Lisa Rodriguez specialized in interstate fraud cases. I presented her with Carol Henderson's complete investigation file, the recordings of Rick's threats, and attempted assault and documentation of his true identity as Richard Kowalski, a fugitive from Arizona justice. Detective Rodriguez immediately recognized the pattern from similar cases she had worked. Rick's methodology of targeting vulnerable single mothers, isolating them from family support systems, and stealing property through emotional manipulation was a known criminal enterprise that law enforcement had been tracking across multiple states. "We've been looking for this guy for 18 months, Detective Rodriguez explained as she reviewed the evidence. Richard Kowalski has been operating under various fake identities, using stolen social security numbers and forged documents. The pregnancy manipulation tactic is part of his standard operating procedure. Getting these women pregnant makes them less likely to report crimes and more likely to stay loyal even when evidence of his other victims surfaces. Within 2 hours, Detective Rodriguez had coordinated with Arizona authorities and issued an arrest warrant for Richard Kowalski as a fugitive from justice. The warrant included charges for violation of parole identity theft fraud and interstate criminal enterprise. Additional charges for assault and battery would be filed based on my recorded evidence of his threatening behavior with the lamp. My second meeting was with District Attorney Michael Chen, where I presented comprehensive evidence of Sarah's document fraud and false police reports. However, I proposed a deal that would serve justice while protecting my sister from the full consequences of her manipulated choices. If Sarah cooperated completely in Rick's prosecution, provided detailed testimony about his methods and manipulation tactics, and made full restitution for all costs related to her fraudulent filings, I would not press charges against her. I explained that Sarah had been victimized by a professional criminal, and that prosecuting her would accomplish nothing beyond destroying what remained of our family. District Attorney Chen agreed to the arrangement, recognizing that Sarah's testimony would be crucial for convicting Rick and protecting his future victims. The deal required Sarah to acknowledge publicly that all her property claims were false file-corrected statements with the county recorder's office and pay all legal fees associated with clearing the fraudulent documents from public records. When I returned home that afternoon, I found Sarah sitting alone at the kitchen table surrounded by empty boxes and discarded belongings. Rick was gone, having fled during the night when he realized his criminal identity had been exposed and law enforcement would soon be involved. Sarah had spent the morning searching through Rick's possessions, finding evidence of his deception that confirmed everything I had revealed the night before. Hidden in his clothing were photographs of previous victims' business cards with multiple fake names and detailed notes about our family's financial information that he had been gathering since their first date. Most devastating was a letter Rick had written, but never sent to his friend Tommy, describing his plan to convince Sarah to take out a home equity loan against my house, then disappear with the money just like his previous scams. The pregnancy wasn't the foundation of their future together. It was Rick's insurance policy that would keep Sarah emotionally invested while he drained our family's resources. Sarah broke down completely as she processed the full scope of Rick's manipulation. Every conversation they had shared, every intimate moment, every plan for their future had been calculated moves in his criminal enterprise. The man she thought loved her had been studying her vulnerabilities from day one, crafting responses designed to make her more compliant and isolated. Jonas. I'm so sorry. Sarah sobbed the words, feeling inadequate for the magnitude of her betrayal. I know saying sorry can't fix what I did to you, what I almost cost our family. I was so stupid, so desperate to believe that someone could love me after Brad's betrayal that I let Rick turn me against the one person who actually cared about my well-being. The conversation that followed was painful, but necessary. Sarah needed to understand how Rick's manipulation had worked, how professional criminals identify and exploit emotional vulnerabilities, and how her desperate need for security had made her an ideal target for his schemes. Emma and Tyler, confused by Rick's sudden disappearance, needed age-appropriate explanations about why he had to leave, and why some adults pretend to be good people while actually being dangerous. Sarah and I worked together to help them understand that Rick's gifts and attention had been ways of controlling their family, not expressions of genuine care. The legal resolution took several months, but brought complete vindication. Rick was arrested at the Mexican border trying to cross with false identification documents. His capture led to contact from 7 additional victims across 4 states, women who had been too ashamed or frightened to report their experiences, until they learned other women had faced similar abuse. Rick's trial became a significant case for interstate fraud prosecution. Sarah's testimony was crucial for establishing his pattern of manipulation and demonstrating how professional criminals exploit family relationships to commit property theft. Rick was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison and ordered to pay restitution to all his victims. Sarah's restitution process was comprehensive and meaningful. She worked with county officials to correct every false document she had filed, paid all legal fees associated with clearing the fraudulent records, and provided written statements acknowledging that her property claims had been completely false. More importantly, Sarah began intensive therapy to understand how she had become vulnerable to Rick's manipulation and to work through the trauma that had made her desperate for security through relationships rather than personal strength. She learned to recognize manipulation tactics and rebuild her sense of self-worth independent from male validation. Our family's healing process was gradual but genuine. Sarah and I established new house rules based on mutual respect, clear boundaries, and honest communication. She contributed fairly to household expenses, maintained her own space responsibly, and included me in any decisions that affected our shared living situation. 6 months after Rick's arrest, Sarah found a better position as a dental office manager with full benefits and professional growth opportunities. She began planning to eventually move into her own apartment nearby, understanding that independence would be healthier for both of us and would provide a better example for her children. Sarah decided to continue her pregnancy and raise the baby as a single mother determined to provide stability through her own strength, rather than dependence on manipulative relationships. She surrounded herself with supportive friends, engaged family therapy for the children, and built a life foundation based on honest work and authentic connections. The house that had become a battlefield slowly transformed back into a real home. Emma and Tyler rebuilt their relationship with their uncle, understanding now that my boundaries and concerns had come from love rather than jealousy. Family dinners resumed with genuine conversation, shared responsibilities, felt natural rather than burdensome, and everyone contributed to maintaining a peaceful household. I learned invaluable lessons about the difference between helping family and enabling destructive behavior. Real love sometimes requires difficult conversations, firm boundaries, and allowing people to face consequences for their choices rather than protecting them from reality. Supporting family doesn't mean sacrificing your own security or tolerating disrespect in the name of keeping peace. Sarah's transformation was remarkable. She evolved from a woman desperate for external validation into someone who found strength through personal integrity and honest relationships. She learned that true security comes from building your own stability rather than manipulating others or depending on romantic relationships for financial survival. Our father would have been proud to see how our family rebuilt itself on foundations of truth, respect, and genuine care, rather than obligation, guilt, and emotional manipulation. The house remained mine legally, but it became a real family home, where everyone was valued, everyone contributed, and no one took advantage of others' generosity. Justice was served not through revenge or destruction, but through truth, accountability, and the hard work of rebuilding trust through authentic change. Rick's criminal enterprise was stopped before he could victimize more women. Sarah learned to build security through honest means, and our family emerged stronger by confronting difficult truths rather than enabling comfortable lies. The greatest victory wasn't keeping my house or exposing Rick's crimes. It was watching Sarah transform into a woman who could protect herself and her children through strength and wisdom, rather than manipulation and dependence. That transformation gave me hope that real love, even when expressed through difficult boundaries, ultimately leads to healing and growth for everyone involved. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for family is refuse to enable their worst impulses, even when that refusal feels cruel in the moment. Sometimes protecting people you care about means forcing them to face reality, even when that reality is painful. And sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is helping them discover their own strength, rather than constantly rescuing them from the consequences of their choices. What would you do if someone you loved was being manipulated into betraying you? How do you balance family loyalty with protecting yourself from people who would take advantage of your generosity? Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members to protect your own well-being? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like this video if it resonated with your own experiences with family dynamics and manipulation. Thank you for listening to my story, and for understanding that sometimes the most difficult family situations require the most courage to resolve honestly. I hope sharing my experience helps others recognize manipulation tactics and find the strength to protect themselves while still showing love for family members who have lost their way. Remember that setting boundaries isn't about punishment. It's about creating space for healing growth and authentic relationships built on mutual respect rather than fear or obligation.